Welcome to the DNA Talks podcast, where we take on the mission of unlocking the code of your genetics. This season is all about you, upgrading your health, not just on the surface, but down to the root cause. Join us as your clinicians at the DNA company investigate your DNA and beyond. The intention of this podcast is to enhance your lifestyle by changing what is in your control. This does not substitute the medical advice given by your personal doctor, therapist, and other healthcare professionals.
Hello, my name is Dr. Lara Varden. I'm an in-house clinician here at the DNA Company and Dean of the DNA University. And I am so excited because I am joined here by two of our favorite in-house clinicians. We've got AJ and Justin with us today to provide their brilliance, experience in this realm that we are going to be talking about, which is anti-inflammatory diets. Really interesting stuff here today. And just to give you a little insight, some of the takeaways that we want you to have by listening to this podcast, you are going to be learning about what inflammation is, knowing the difference between acute and chronic inflammation, learning about the different genetic factors that can actually influence inflammatory response, as well as anti-inflammatory diets and specific foods that can help lower that inflammation, and also some practical strategies that we here at the DNA Company as clinicians use to help you lowering that inflammation. So I want to say welcome, guys. Thank you for being here. How are you doing today?
Good. Happy to be here.
Yes, excited. Actually, this is my first time to be on with Justin, who is so famous and I know crowd favorite. So I'm honored to be in everyone's presence and to join y'all today.
Likewise.
Fantastic. So we've got some really great actionable information today. So let's dive right in. And actually, I'm going to put on my teacher hat again and dig into some of the science, as far as what is inflammation. So really, inflammation at its core, this is the body's natural response to injury, infection, or harmful stimuli. It is designed to protect and heal tissues. So, for example, when you experience a cut, burn, or infection, your immune system activates to remove the harmful agents and initiate that healing process. And inflammation, it really can be categorized into two types: acute inflammation and chronic inflammation. So, acute inflammation, this is that short-term beneficial response that helps the body heal. For example, like when you scrape your knee, the redness, swelling, and warmth are signs of that acute inflammation. Those, white blood cells, the inflammatory response that they give in order to resolve that injury or infection. Now, compared to chronic inflammation, unlike acute inflammation, chronic inflammation is long-term. This is often this low-grade response that occurs when the body continues to release inflammatory molecules, even when there's no immediate threat. Now, chronic inflammation can actually last for months or even years, and it's linked to a wide ranges of diseases like heart disease, diabetes, arthritis, and even some cancers. So, when we're looking at chronic inflammation, it can sometimes be difficult to know what exactly is going on because there's so many different responses that our body has. Some signs that you might have chronic inflammation. This could include things like fatigue, digestive issues, frequent infections, joint and muscle pain, skin issues, that can include things like acne, rashes, psoriasis, things like that. Also, brain fog. And you're probably wondering how exactly does this happen? Well, at a cellular level, inflammation involves the immune cells, like I was saying earlier, specifically things like macrophages and neutrophils. They release these signaling molecules that I mentioned earlier called cytokines. So these are things like TNF alpha, your interleukins like interleukin 1, interleukin 6, and even eicosanoids. These are like your prostaglandins, leukotrienes. This is kind of getting into those people nerding out on the science about how all this works. So these molecules actually trigger the inflammatory process. And in chronic inflammation, this occurs when that immune response remains active. And this leads to tissue damage, contributing to that disease development because it actually makes the blood vessels a little leaky in order for the macrophages, the neutrophils, to get into those tissues to do that response. But if that stays leaky over a long period of time, you're going to have some issues. So off with the nerdiness and into some of the practical information. And let's get into genetic factors and also like, what do we do? So, you know what? I'm going to throw this over to you, Justin, because obviously people who work with us have their DNA 360 done. So what do you look for when you're, working with someone? First of all, how do you determine they have chronic inflammation? And then what do you look at in their genetic reports?
Yeah, so I mean, when we talk about the genes in relation to inflammation, a lot of it has to do with that toxic burden on the body. We have so many little indicators within the DNA 360 as far as like how is your body detox and therefore deal with inflammation. I think that toxins and inflammation are really one and the same as far as a conversation is concerned. And it's exactly what you said, Dr. Laura. We've got acute, which is like you get stung by a bee, it swells up to quarantine the poison, right? It swells it up with water, and that deals with the injury. But when we zoom out and we have more of a systemic inflammation where we can't turn the inflammatory response off now, we have to kind of look at why does your body have so much inflammation and where is it coming from? To me, if you have a systemic inflammation going on, it means that you have a lot of toxic burden. And it's very difficult for your body to deal with it because it's coming from so many locations at the same time. So like, for example, I'll look at your glutathionization profile, which speaks to respiratory tract, gut microbiome, as well as liver. So let's say you have suboptimal glutathinization. Well, we can operate under the assumption that your body is not getting that phase 2 detoxification in these numerous locations, and you're having more toxic load. More toxic load means more inflammation because your body is recognizing things as an enemy, right? So it incites that inflammatory response to deal with said enemy. This is really relevant for the microbiome because if you take in food that your body thinks is totally foreign and is like, what is that? It has to kick on the inflammatory response. So if you're eating 3 meals a day and 2 out of 3 have toxins in there, what your body is interpreting as toxins, of course, you've increased that cumulative toxin load and therefore the chronic inflammation response. So I always like to use the term work backwards. I look at the genes and I work backwards from there. Does your methylation suck? Okay, well, let's go ahead and reinforce that area. Does your mitochondrial detox suck? Okay, well, let's reinforce that area. And I try to kind of pick that apart, get you the right nutrients, get you the right detoxification strategies. And that in and of itself reduces the cumulative toxin load, and that can help a lot with systemic inflammation. Then we get super duper into the weeds as far as like what foods are actually triggering these kinds of things. And that's where someone like AJ would come into the picture because she's really skilled at identifying these things and then, using different diets, etc. So AJ, like, what do you do if someone comes to you with systemic inflammation? What's the low-hanging fruit diet-wise that you would point towards?
So really, the low-hanging fruit, sometimes we get so focused on add in, right? What can I do? Well, what can you not do that might help to get rid of some of those toxins? If we know that your detox profiles aren't ideal, that you're going to have a gut lining that's going to, suffer a little bit with these toxins and getting all of it out of your body. Well, can we do a little bit of a, meal history. Can you kind of give me an idea of what you're eating on a daily basis? And then we can say, okay, what kind of quality is this food? Before we even go on some like green juice spree or some Xylem Husk, whatever, like detox program, let's just do the simple things and say, hey, you know what? Like that Mickey D's might not be helping your inflammation levels, right? And we can talk about the toxicities of seed oils and the inflammation that those cause in our bodies. And so sometimes I think we're just so anxious to add things in, because when we put something in, we kind of get the psychological thought of like we're doing something, right? It's like, oh, okay, I'm doing something new, I'm creating a new habit. But sometimes we just need to really evaluate what we're doing on a daily basis. Are we drinking tap water? Or are we drinking filtered water? You know, where can we just find toxins within our daily life environment and current eating habits that we could remove and just replace with cleaner versions? As in, okay, I've been eating maybe some meat that isn't the best quality. If my budget allows, can I go ahead and opt for something that's grass-fed? Maybe it doesn't have the organic label because I can't quite do grass-fed organic with my budget. But if we start cleaning up just the little things, can we start seeing a difference and a shift in the amount of, say, stiffness in your joints, or in how many rashes or bumps you have on your skin that you've been trying to solve? And so sometimes that's the most gentle approach, because we do also want to remember that as we reduce inflammation and say swelling starts to go down, and we will then also start losing weight, our body has to detox all the toxins and everything that are, say, released from our fat and released. And so we don't want to be too aggressive all the time. And so sometimes it's just seeing what can we do, what can we take out rather than add in. And that's a lot of times my first step, is how can we alter the diet and make some swaps, so that you're still eating what's comfortable to you, right? Without, it's not have a burger, just let's maybe make it at home rather than grabbing it from the fast food joint, and see if we can start naturally getting some inflammation to come down in a comfortable way where we don't feel like we've just overhauled your whole life in an instant.
So let me ask this. You were saying, wanting to make sure their inflammation comes down. How do you know that their inflammation is coming down? What, are there tests that you look at, particular markers? I mean, what are your benchmarks that you use? And I'll shoot this back to AJ, and then I want to hear what Justin does.
Yeah. So ideally, we do like to run labs, right? I want to see what is your HSCRP, right? So that's your highly sensitive C-reactive protein. If that number is high, there's good indication that you've got some chronic inflammation going on, right? I want to see, what are your omega-3 levels at? If we look at your omega-3 to omega-6 ratio, where are your omega-6s setting at, right? Because as we'll get on into the conversation, many studies have shown omega-3s, the higher intake of, say, salmon and those sorts of things, and higher omega-3 fatty acids within your blood correlate to healthier, longer lifespans, lower levels of inflammation, and those sorts of things. So ideally, having labs to look at, it's great. It's a way for both myself and, a client to be able to see a starting point. And then as we progress and make changes, then we can retest and we have data, right? We're data driven. We like to see that. However, we can't neglect the anecdotal information, right? So if you start making these changes, and every day when you woke up, it took everything in you, you're creaking, twisting out of your bed, and you're just like, man, I'm stiff, to rolling out of the bed, no trouble. You don't need blood tests to know that your inflammation has gone down. You're the testimony, right? So that's my approach. It just depends on what the client is comfortable with and what data we have to start with. And but those would be markers I would look at. But then also just the human. How are you feeling and where are we getting? Yeah.
How about you, Justin?
Yeah, I mean, it's, test, don't guess, right? The lab work is there for a reason. I always say that, we're fortunate that in 2024, we have the capacity to just look, like if you want to see what's going on in your body, well, look, right? We have the ability to do that now. Beyond that, it's really just a clinical correlation. How are you feeling? Like when we first started, how did you feel? And where are we at now that we've implemented some of these strategies? I love what AJ said about it being more of a process of deletion in the beginning as opposed to addition. So many people come to me and say, like, what can I add? How can I, add this supplement to improve the health outcome? And as we kind of work through it, I've identified sometimes a dozen different things that are contributing to the issue. So, well, let's not add something in, let's delete it. It's like if you're going to go make a sculpture, the sculpture is already in there. We just got to get rid of all the stuff first, right? We've got to whittle away at some of these things. So I'll audit them. I'll go right through all these different various lifestyles. Do they have a lot of toxic Wi-Fi, a lot of obviously inflammatory lifestyle factors and behaviors? Are they chronically stressed? Is there things I can identify that are constantly kicking them out of homeostasis? And how can I pull them back? How can I get them into that, restorative mode? So yeah, it's a process of deletion. And once we've got rid of those inflammatory factors, if they still feel like crap, or if they still have, high CRP or high homocysteine or whatever, yeah, we add in the interventions from there, things that directly counteract it. And I, of course, correlate that to the genes, right? Like, let's say you have totally suboptimal SOD2 pathway. Well, the intervention is probably not going to be to take milk thistle because it's not the pathway that operates on. We might do something more specific to the mitochondria because we can assume that that's one of those weak points. Remembering that the genes are a factory setting, genes encode enzymes, enzymes tell the cells how to behave. There's all these weird little intricate pathways going on there at all times within the human body. So we need to know this is a weak point. Let's go ahead and reinforce it with our strategies. And from there, the body starts to correct itself. The body has an innate intelligence. It knows how to heal itself. And I just go in and I nourish that to the best of my ability.
Fantastic. I know for me, I do dive a bit into blood work, different markers and other things, as well. Some other markers that I happen to look at. I also I look at the ones that AJ had mentioned, but there's also what they call erythrocyte sedimentation rate (ESR), and this test measures how quickly red blood cells settle at the bottom of a test tube. And a high ESR indicates inflammation. And then there's other things like if there's cytokine levels, some of the ones that I had mentioned earlier, the TNF alpha, IL-6, IL-1, that can indicate higher inflammation. Also homocysteine. And this really, I have found, well, it's associated with the methylation pathway. If someone has dysregulated MTHFR and other genes that are in the methylation pathway, and they are not methylating very well because there is a methylation, to homocysteine into methionine. And if that's not happening, you have higher homocysteine levels. When you have higher homocysteine level, that is an indication of systemic inflammation and, can actually increase cardiovascular risk. I also look at like white blood cell count, which can be elevated through a low level infection, looking at like CBCs with differentials. I actually look at the percentages of the neutrophils to lymphocytes, your monocytes, eosinophils, basophils, that really can give an indication on things that, that would say, oh, maybe they've got some low level virus going on, say EBV, Epstein-Barr virus. It may not be an acute response, but in the background, it's working on the inflammatory system, kind of making it weaker. Also, I do want to bring up one of our other tests, our Gut 360. This is a fantastic test that I have personally found to be very informative about the current diversity and population of the gut. Because if someone has high proteobacteria, that is an indication of inflammation going on, because we do know your gut really indicates how good your immune system is and how well it's working. So that's definitely, something that I personally use. I think you guys use that as well. Really looking into it, because food, where does it go? To our guts. Breaks it down, well, we have to know our population. So these are wonderful tools that, we here at the DNA Company do use uh, to help inform us. Again, that data, so important. I want to actually jump in to different diets, because there has been a lot of talk around like carnivore diet. I've had clients, oh, I got on the carnivore diet. My inflammation went down. I felt the best ever. But yeah, I have others. Oh yeah, I've been on the carnivore diet, for months and I don't feel any different. So I want to kind of discuss some of the different diets that are out there, how they can help with inflammation, but then how they cannot, and kind of get your insights. Actually, Justin, why don't I jump over to you, because I know we've done a webinar about the carnivore diet. You want to speak into that?
Yeah, I'm trying to coin the term carnivore plus, because it's like there's this big difference between carnivore and animal based. It's one of those, primal diets. But if you go fully carnivore, it's like going raw vegan, right? As far as like the extremity of it. And it's like you need to understand that there's a spectrum here of diets. Humans are really designed to eat plants and animals, but there's a big spectrum there. And some people are going to be better off on the further side of animals, some people on the further side of plants. We know that you can survive on either or, right? The human body is very adaptable. I mean, Inuit communities have proven that you can eat predominantly animals and thrive. I mean, I don't think there's a lot of diabetes in those populations and things like that. So carnivore plus is what I'm trying to coin here, because it's like I can eat carnivore plus coffee, carnivore plus spices, carnivore plus fruit. So I think that carnivore in and of itself is the ultimate elimination diet. You've really removed a lot of these potentially offending agents, because so many people do react to these various plants, be it a seed oil, be it a lectin, be it gluten, be it all the crap that they put on gluten, right? Glyphosates and what have you. I think that when you do an experiment like an elimination diet, you can really highlight a lot of things. All the way down to meat, which is effectively what we're made out of. That's going to be a pretty big indicator of what's causing you inflammation in the first place. So if you get all the way to that point, then you can just figure out, what do we add in? Can I have some fruit? A lot of people can, because the plant drops it off on purpose. Really, that's not going to have a lot of these defense compounds if it's dropping it off so that you can eat it. But the roots, the stems, the seeds, a lot of people do have reactions to these compounds. There's also another one that's an autoimmune paleo diet that I think is a great little kind of subset there as well. A little bit more inclusive to certain other things, but you have gotten rid of a lot of these more toxic compounds. Because even within carnivore, people will have dairy, for example. So maybe you're okay with meat, but you're not okay with dairy. You can see how personalized this needs to be. Diets are every bit as personalized as any other aspects of your genes. We need to know, what does your body recognize as an enemy, and therefore what is it going to incite a defense against? I think that anything other than the standard American diet is a step in the right direction for most people. I'm of the opinion that a carnivore diet is absolutely useful, but for a lot of people, I don't think you can do it for a lifetime if, let's say, you don't process saturated fat that well, which is not the enemy, but some people genetically don't do it as well as others. You may be missing some gut biome diversity over time if you don't start to incorporate some level of plant matter. So we need to do a big old experiment. We need to look at your genes. We need to get your gut 360 done. And then we need to mess with it to get it right for you. AJ, do you have a different approach on that?
No, I love it. Like, so we are to experiment kind of on ourselves, right? Because you can get all the greatest minds, all the greatest physicians together. They're going to have disagreements because their client populations have been different, their own experiences have been different, and we all have a bias in one way or another when it comes to what works, right? Because we just have different evidence, right? We're dealing with different populations. Now, I always like to play, I hate the term devil's advocate, but it's kind of like as a nutritionist, people, they think, well, oh, you just want me to eat salads, or you want me to eat this or that or whatever. And truly, I have done the gamut of tests on myself. I've been raw vegan, and I'm talking like for serious amounts of time, like not just like, oh, I'm gonna try raw vegan for a week. I'm talking like months and months and months on end. Destroyed me, got off that. Okay, but wanted to experiment because I want to see, okay, what do labs look like after I do this? I have been extreme strict carnivore, right? Where I'm checking ketones and, doing a keto diet and just all the things, right? Again, destroyed me. And then finally realized I should probably stop experimenting on myself just because I'm creating more problems in the process. But when it comes to something like, say, carnivore, I love how you say that it's useful, because it can be useful. Every diet can be useful. It can be therapeutic. Does it mean that it should be long-term? No, it doesn't. And so that's where I feel like people need to remember that food, it's just a tool, right? To make us feel well, to energize us for our lives, right? We don't have to doctrinize it and overthink it because I'm carnivore. Oh, but I had cheese. You had cheese. You're not a carnivore. You're animal based, right? And we get into, and it's like, it doesn't matter. What matters is that you're eating what sustains your body, supports your health, and allows you to thrive so that you can enjoy life on this planet, right? The thing, I guess people just get a little hung up on all of that. And my approach always is I need to know quite a bit about my client from kind of their relationship with food. Whenever we talk about extreme diets and we think about something like a carnivore diet or a keto diet or even a vegan diet, whatever it may be, I'm always hypersensitive to, does this person potentially have an unhealthy relationship with food, as in an eating disorder, right? Because, they're coming to me, they want to try this particular diet. Okay, that's a little extreme. What are you thinking? I kind of dig into that, right? Because the thing that can be misleading, and we could do it to ourselves unknowingly, is everyone is talking about, the health benefits of, say, the carnivore diet. Well, if you maybe have a little bit of a history of eating disorders or crash dieting, are you viewing this more as just a way to lose weight and you're wanting to crash diet because you've heard all these amazing stories? Or are we actually trying to treat something like a very serious chronic inflammation? You're dealing with some type of arthritis, or you're dealing with something that is impacting your life in a negative way that you're willing to take a drastic step for a while? Or are we leaning more into vanity, societal pressures, and those sorts of things, and we're looking to crash diet, right? And so that's where using these diets to fight inflammation is one thing, but we need to really decide, what level of inflammation am I at? How drastic do I need to be? And take as soft an approach as possible in the dietary changes. At least that's kind of the approach that I take.
So what about other diets? Because we've kind of been, mentioning and focusing more on like carnivore diet. What are some other diets that you employ or kind of work, modify with your clients that are anti-inflammatory diets?
Well, the biggest thing, the biggest thing that I will tell people is eat whole foods. If I can just get you, let's not overthink it. The most simple thing you could start doing is eating foods in their whole food-ish format, right? So, of course, ground beef, that's great. It hasn't been like altered. Potatoes, whether you subscribe to higher carb or lower carb or whatever, higher fat, lower fat, just eat foods in their most natural form and try to limit eating out, or at least when you're eating out, try to understand, okay, I can ask for steamed veggies. I can get a baked potato. I can, get them to cook the steak or steam the asparagus without any oils on it or something along those lines. That's the most basic thing. Like if you have no other direction and you don't want to overcomplicate it, just for me, I'm like, if God made it and it grew that way, great, have it. You know what I mean? If man made it and it's some weird thing with all these ingredients on the back, like just ditch that. Like that's my basic, like easy, low-hanging fruit suggestion. Go pick the fruit on the tree, eat that.
The literal low-hanging fruit.
Yeah.
Whatever you could reach.
Yeah. But I don't know, like, do you, Dr. Brenner, do you have something with your clients that a specific diet, because we hear about, okay, Mediterranean diet, study after study has shown that lowers inflammation, right? We've got all these different diets and ways of eating. Do you recommend those diets? Do you recommend them with some caveats of, be aware of this particular thing, like say too much olive oil, right? If we get into too much seed oils, could too much olive oil, if you're cooking with it, go rancid and then you're causing a problem even though you're following Mediterranean. Do you have anything in particular you suggest?
Well, actually, I take the approach first very similar to what you do. It's like, let's look at their current diet. What are their current issues? I have, my clients fill out a food, mood, poop journal. I mean, we want to know, how is the food that you are eating, how is it affecting your body? How is it making you feel? Not just mentally, mood wise, I feel wonderful, I've got energy, or I feel fatigued, I've got a headache, but also that physiological bloating, gas, just, really, I find that when they start filling it out, because a lot of them are like, I eat healthy, I'm good. And then it's like, just fill it out and be honest, because we don't want to go, this week I'm going to eat as perfectly as I can. I want it to be reflective of what they are actually doing, because there's no judgment. We want to get to the, root cause of the problem and what are the triggers, that could be the food that they are eating. And they come back and go, wow, I didn't realize that, say I was eating the same thing and every time I did, it was making me, get tired. Or that, wow, I was eating a lot more ice cream than I thought, or I was eating, something and it was affecting my sleep, or it was, I was getting constipated, or, it can really provide a lot of insights and reflection when we actually start writing it down. But also, and I don't remember if you had mentioned this earlier in this podcast or right before we started recording, but food sensitivity tests. Mm-hmm. These are wonderful because even if someone is eating, that whole foods, healthy diet, I'm eating broccoli and sweet potatoes and, all this other stuff. Well, if you have a problem, say with nightshades and you're having tomatoes and peppers, and you are reacting to that, or to the cruciferous vegetables, your broccoli, obviously you may think, well, yeah, it might be healthy in general and for someone else, but you are reacting to it. This is causing more inflammation. So it's really starting to dive down, but we have to clear those muddy waters first. We really need, let's just kind of do that broad base cleanse of, eating the whole foods, eating, well-sourced meats, poultries, fish. Then if you're still having problems, what's going on with that?
Yeah.
So, and that's, where we can really, turn the dials. Justin, I would love to hear your approach on this.
Modern day food has such an incredible spectrum that it operates on. I mean, it can be literal poison or literal medicine and everything in between. So, of course, I'm the genes guy, so I'm going to bounce it off the genes, because even within, let's say, a paleo diet, I mentioned paleo earlier, there's low carb paleo, there's higher carb paleo, there's, a paleo with or without a fasting element. If I were to just blanketly say, I think it's a good idea to go on a paleo diet, well, you could have, sweet potatoes covered in honey 3 times a day and no protein and no nothing else. And that is a paleo approved ingredient list, but it still doesn't make sense, right? Like, you're not getting any protein, you're not adding any, fats like that you need. So it's always a big personalization process. I certainly start where you guys start, right? I have had patients that actually told me first time I met them, I've had McDonald's more than once today. And I said, well, how do you feel, mate? Like, it's pretty obvious that you shouldn't feel too good on that. You just took in massive amounts of poison. I mean, just so you know. So, of course, we have to tackle that first. Is this recognizable from the earth whatsoever? In our ancestors' day, could you have picked it or fished it or hunted it or whatever out of the ground, out of a tree? We need to start there, because if you're eating frankenfoods, then yeah, I mean, you're obviously creating inflammation, because there is no way that we have evolved yet for your gut microbiome to understand what the heck you just took in, right? So let's eliminate that first. Like we talked about, it's a process of deletion. Then let's add in the healthy foods, right? So, I'll look at your AMY1 gene. I'll look at your TCF7L2 gene. I'll make sure that you're having a dosage of protein with every meal so that we have those building blocks that we need. And then I personalize it with clinical correlation, because if you're absolutely underweight, I'm not going to ask you to do, a 3-day fast right now. It just wouldn't make any sense. So I always say this in our webinars and things, that I treat the person, not the paper. It's not about looking at the DNA 360 and saying, you need to do this, this, and this because the algorithm said so. Well, Justin is saying something different because I'm looking at you and I'm talking to you, and you just told me that you have an eating disorder. So it's not a good idea for us to do a restricted calorie diet right now, or whatever it may be, So it's always about clinical correlation and treating the person and understanding you don't have a baseline ability to metabolize starches. And I know that your buddy's on a bodybuilding diet and he has chicken and rice 12 times a day. You're not going to have the same response as he is, right? So we look at activity levels. We look at all of these things from a zoomed out perspective. That's why we have such an intricate intake form as well. People hate doing intakes. So do I, because it's irritating. It's a big, long list that you got to do. But I have to know a lot of things about you, the human that I'm actually treating and trying to improve. It starts with real food, and then we use the genes. We use things like the Gut 360. If you have a food sensitivity test available, that's great. We know that we're not going to be putting you on nightshades if you're sensitive or whatever it is. So there's a lot of data. There's actually a lot of work that goes into getting the diet right for you. Then we have labs and we have anecdotal evidence. How do you feel? Do your joints still hurt? Is that brain fog still there? Are those breakouts still happening? These are indicators that we have work to do still. And then we'll just continue on until we get it right.
And I wanted to add on, Dr. Lara, like how you have someone, I love your food, mood, poop, right? Did I put it in the right order? Or whatever the order is, I love it. Because I'm always talking about people's food, their mood, and their poop. We get into the poop discussion and they get a little like, oh gosh, we're talking about poop. And I'm like, it's totally fine. We do this, talk about this all the time. But having one of those, right? Because it's like, okay, we're talking about inflammation, we're talking about anti-inflammatory diets, but we're the DNA company. So we understand everybody is different, right? So to give these big blanket statements is really hard. What can someone do today? You can get a journal and you can write on one side, these are the symptoms I'm experiencing that I do not like, right? I'm waking up fatigued. My left elbow hurts. My big right toe is sore. I have a rash here. Like these are things like that I feel. And this is my current diet, right? And so just kind of jot down, what are you eating currently, right? Be your own physician here and do these things. And then make a decision. Okay, for the next 3 months, I'm going to adhere to just eating whole foods. We're not cutting out anything other than stuff that's not a whole food. So we're going to eat dairy, we're going to eat eggs, we're going to eat all the proteins, we're going to eat all the fruits and the veggies and all the things, right? But you need to give your body time. And so then You can make notes. Oh, how are you feeling? Okay, you're going through different symptoms. Okay, well, after 3 months, revisit and write a new symptom list. Maybe all it is now is, oh, my right toe still hurts a little bit, but the elbow's fine. My skin rash is gone. This is better. And write down, okay, what have the primary things been in your diet at this point? Maybe you're seeing maybe you did have a little bit more joint pain. And when you look at your whole food plan that you've just been eating, like kind of the stuff that's been reoccurring, maybe it is really high in oxalates. And then it's kind of like, oh, well, maybe I should just check into a little bit lower oxalate version of a whole food diet. Try that for 3 months, right? Because the thing that everyone needs to remember is that when it comes to inflammation and addressing these symptoms in our body, we don't have these overnight magic pills, right? It'd be great if we did. We don't. And we need to give our body something. Oh, I tried an anti-inflammatory diet for a week and I am still feeling terrible. I'm done. Back to Mickey D's. And it's like, well, let's give you some time, right? And so that's kind of my suggestion. If you're just trying to one-man band it and you don't, you're just, budget doesn't allow for, say, bunches of blood work, or you just don't have the time, you can investigate yourself and see your inflammation go down and kind of do things that way. And then when you get to a point of you know what, I still have these few signs of inflammation, I still just can't kick the fatigue, get a physician, get someone who can help you, right? That's, one of the in-house clinicians here, where it's like, okay, well, maybe we need to look at your micronutrients. You could, just from poor eating, maybe you've got some deficiencies. Maybe we need to do that food sensitivity testing, right? And then continue to dial it in and personalize it for you. And you can beat the inflammation if you just will give yourself the time. I can tell you that if I eat something that doesn't agree with me, I can feel it right away, right? It doesn't take 3 months for me to feel poorly when I have something. However, whenever I'm trying to investigate things, I say 3 months because we're not going to nail it right away, right? We're going to have this little phase of where, oh, well, this week I still ate out 4 times, but I tried to incorporate some more foods. And so by the time I feel like we get to that end of the 3 months, that's where you've dialed in the new habits. You're being much more focused on it, right? And so that first month or so, a couple of weeks or so can be just transitional. Now, I have clients that when I put them, I deal a lot with high histamine clients, that are trying to get histamine levels down. I personally deal with histamine intolerance, salicylate issues, and those sorts of things. So for me and for clients, I can watch them in a week. There are dramatic differences, right? And that could be a diet coupled with some enzymes. It can be a diet, 3 or 4 days in, and you can already start feeling some fatigue leaving or feeling some clearness to your mind. I mean, do y'all see this with your clients as far as just how dramatic the difference can be in a short time?
Yeah, absolutely. You got to, remind people sometimes that, mate, you are not a garbage disposal. You know what I mean? We have some capacity to detoxify ourselves, but the problem is our bodies were designed before modern culture was what it is now. You know what I mean? We've introduced so many different things into how we create food that now I think a lot of it is just unrecognizable. So it's as soon as you cut that out, a lot of the timeline is immediate, but then some of it is still going to take those 3 months. If you cut that food out that your body is immediately recognizing as poison and reacting to, some of the benefits are going to be felt right away. And I've seen that. I've seen people be like, oh man, within the week that I cut that out, I'm already 25% better. But it's just a hard thing to nail down, like AJ said. So it's it needs to be a little bit more of a prolonged experiment. Ultimately, we get there, but we start with what's obvious, and then we dial it and we dial it and we dial it further. And then, we get to the optimal diet for you. And some of it's right away. Some of it might take 6 months. Who knows? But it's really just a process that we have to give respect to. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.